We have a very special guest today, Kelly, who has successfully landed UX design internship at multiple tech companies. Kelly is here to share some advice and insights on creating a standout portfolio, writing a case study, and everything you need to know about breaking into UX and product design. So grab your new boot and let's jump into our conversation. Could you tell me a little bit about your journey? How did you transition from electronical engineering and computer science to the areas of product design?
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your YouTube channel. I'm really excited to talk to you today. My name is Kelly, and I'm currently a junior studying electrical engineering and computer science at UC Berkeley, and with a concentration in design innovation. But I actually didn't start out on this path at all. I started out doing bioengineering at Berkeley. That was the original major that I got into Berkeley with. And ever since high school, I wanted to pursue a career in medical devices and become a doctor. So that was my dream like a couple of years ago. And to be honest, I didn't really know why I chose that path. I think my initial kind of motivation was because I wanted to be a part in impacting people's lives and improving them. And the healthcare industry seemed like the most, logical path, especially since I come from a pretty sheltered community. I'm from Canada originally, but I grew up in a very like homogenous community. A lot of these careers were very common, and I never even heard about design in high school. And so when I moved to Berkeley during college and kind of escaped that sheltered community, I realized that, there was so much more out there, first of all, and second of all, that I didn't even like my major. I quickly realized that all the like technical and theoretical aspects of bioengineering just seemed super out of reach for me, and that, becoming a part of people's lives would take years and just like a lot of broad practices that I didn't see myself becoming passionate about. And so in college, I decided to like explore some computer science courses, and that's how I got into technology and this world of tech. And so I explored, like software engineering, like app building, as well as like um, joining a couple of clubs that did these things. And I eventually landed on this club called Berkeley Innovation, that is a design club at Berkeley. And it became something that I quickly loved and was super passionate about. And after doing a couple of projects with this club, I decided to switch my major and pursue design. Currently, I'm doing electrical engineering and computer science because I also love the aspect of like being able to build something. And I think being able to pair that with design is really powerful because my knowledge in design allows me to like understand how to build these things to the most like human-centered way and the most impactful ways for people. And that is ultimately what I was searching for when I first came to college. And so yeah, like through doing these clubs, I eventually got to kind of engage with a network and join internships that have got me to where I am today in design. So
I also see you have done so many different like product design internship. Like, could you share a little bit about like how did your internship experience shape you like design approach or also shape your design career path?
So I think to sum it all up, I think internships have really allowed me to gain like real world experience in a variety of different industries. Like I just mentioned, I think there are so many different like types of design that you could engage in throughout like any career. And I think internships are a great way to explore all those different types, whether it's working at like a big company, working on like gaming, working on smaller companies. And so I think all these different environments have helped me learn in different ways and like see new perspectives in the design field. My very first internship was actually with a graphic design and web design marketing role. It was a very like broad role at a really small company, but it really allowed me to see like all those different aspects of design. I did this internship like way back when I was still doing bioengineering, but it was like my first push into like design as a career. I think it was like not necessarily something I was super passionate about, but it allowed me to kind of see the creative applications of design. I got to design like a website for the company and design marketing materials for them. And then I also got to talk to the UI UX team. And through talking with them, I was like, I really want to try this out. And so after that internship, I returned the next summer and tried UI UX at the same company. And then through doing these club projects at school, I got more experience with that, and then was able to intern at Meta the next summer. And so all these different like types of um, experiences have really, I think, taught me that design isn't just like a one size fits all, I guess. Like it's not the same at every company that you do, and it definitely teaches you something new every time. I think the first time I stepped into design, it was like super messy, super hands-on, and super like, just like honestly really crazy, but I really liked it. Like in terms of like getting to think outside the box and getting to think in these new ways. And then going to Meta, it was like a totally different experience as well, like going into a more specific topic and working on like Instagram's messaging services. So yeah, I think all those experiences have allowed me to um, think more critically about where I want to be post-grad, but also allow me to just have more perspectives and shape my own design process too.
So let's talk a little bit more about your portfolio. I'm curious about what type of platforms did you use to build your online portfolio?
How my portfolio came into the state as it is today. I actually started my portfolio in a class at Berkeley. It's called the Web Design Decal here at Berkeley. It's a student-led like web development class where students can learn about like front-end engineering as well as website design. And so I took this class in freshman year, and one of the final projects was to design any website that you want from scratch. And so I took this as an opportunity to create my own personal portfolio. And so the very first like iteration of this portfolio was me trying to code it with like HTML and CSS and all these basic web tools. And it was like a mild success at first. I was able to like deploy it onto the GitHub pages, and it was like live and everything, but my coding skills back then were really bad. So the like maintenance of it was not good at all. Like it was not scalable. I like couldn't really do many like case studies on it without it breaking. And so I ended up like not using that for my recruiting purposes and like starting from scratch. And I transitioned to something called Webflow, which is a low code website builder. And it's super great, I think, especially coming from like a more technical background. Webflow is basically allows you to transform like the box model HTML and CSS into customizable pages. And so, yeah, I started using that platform a lot and building my portfolio into something more scalable, responsive, and like overall, like a more professional website.
How did you like choose the project to present in your online portfolio?
I think when it comes to choosing projects, I like to think about, first of all, the impact that the project had. And so I like to think about it from both like, did it impact the company or the client that I worked with? And then second of all, like how much it impacted me as a designer. So I think I value both of those like equally in terms of like how much I was able to create in this project and what impact I was able to give, but also like how much it taught me as a person. And then secondly, I also really like to think about like the end product and how that would be able to show on my portfolio and the different skills that it shows to like a recruiter or like a person viewing it. And so I guess to kind of walk through the projects on my portfolio right now, my most like highlighted project, I guess, is my most recent one from Instagram, which was one of the projects that I'm most proud of, which is why I chose it to put it like at the very top, because it was the very first project I did like with a bigger company. It was a very like high quality polished type of craft project that I thought would be really captivating to show in my portfolio. But also it was really special to me because I got the chance to like learn a lot in this internship and explore a variety of different design processes as well that was really new to me. And so I decided to highlight that in the very front, since it's a little bit of a different process as my other projects, which I mostly did in school. And so, yeah, that's my first project. And then the other projects that I have are secondly with a nonprofit that I worked for in school. The reason why I chose this one was because it really meant a lot to me in terms of the impact that it had on the community. Basically, this project was with a organization at school called Blueprint that works with nonprofits to create apps for local nonprofits. And the mission surrounding this project was super meaningful to me, being able to help low impact family or low income families create mobility from poverty. That mission was like super inspiring to me, and I thought I could tell the story really well on my portfolio, as well as it was my very first like end-to-end mobile and desktop design project. And so I think those skills really highlighted in terms of me being able to choose this on my portfolio. And then finally, the last two projects I have were the projects that I did in my club, Berkeley Innovation. And those two are more like, they're kind of like at the bottom of my portfolio, but they're more like showing the end-to-end process and how I'm able to navigate different design contexts. So I think they're still really powerful in showing that foundation. If someone wants to look at it, they can see like, the different strategies that I employ in my process and the different products that I've done in the past. So yeah, those are kind of like that's how like kind of my thought process goes when I choose projects. But in the grand scheme of things, I like to look at, how much growth I was able to have with each project and how the variety of different like thinking processes I was able to show.
How many projects do you recommend for like student designer or junior designer to showcase like their skill sets in their online portfolio?
I would recommend at least 3 really strong case studies. I think when I even started recruiting, I tried to always have at least 3 readable case studies in my portfolio. And then like maybe like 3 to 4 if you have like the work to show for it. Especially for beginner designers, I know it's like a little bit hard to have a lot of like variety of work. I remember in like my sophomore year when I was just starting out, it was really hard for me to like create 3 or 4 or 5 like different case studies like I see a lot of other people have. But I think it's still really important to have like, at least 3, maybe like at the minimum 2 really strong projects, but 3 I think is like the a good minimum. I've also seen people have like different tabs where they put like more explorative work or like work that's not necessarily their like main discipline in design. For example, one of my friends is really into like branding and visual design, so they have like a different section for that, but their main focus is product design. I think that is also like very strong for a portfolio. I personally don't have that just because I haven't really had the time to create like those tabs, but I would recommend showcasing like 3 to 4 main projects on the first page and then having like additional work elsewhere, since it kind of allows recruiters and people to see your best work and then highlight what you bring to the table as a young designer.
I wonder, like, when you were working on your student project, did you think about going into different like product areas or design different project for different device? You can showcase the diversities in your portfolio.
So yeah, I definitely did. When I was doing my first cycle of recruiting last year, I actually only had 2 projects that were completed in my kind of like experience as a young designer. I only had the 2 that I worked on in that club, and then they were both desktop projects. So at the time I was like looking for a mobile or like different type of discipline to show like my all-roundedness as a designer. But it was like the summer, I like couldn't really like do another internships, and so I was like trying to figure out what project I could showcase or like what new thing I could showcase in my portfolio. And so at the time I think I took it out of my took the initiative to like seek different passion projects and different opportunities for me to like quickly create a project that was still meaningful to both like my goals and my portfolio. And so I participated in this thing called the Adobe Creative Jam, which was like it's something that the Adobe company organizes for students like a couple times a year, where you get to work with other students and compete in like a mini hackathon where you can create a design deliverable at the end of it and just jam on different scopes. I think at the time my the competition that I entered was with Instagram, and it was about like small businesses, and it was a mobile project too. So I participated in it, and I created something with one of my friends and then put that on my portfolio. And so, yeah, I think seeking things out like that when you want to kind of diversify those works on your portfolio is a really great way to do so. Another thing that I would recommend is like if you can't find a competition or like a hackathon out there, maybe you could create your own project that you're really passionate about. And that's something that I have been like trying to engage in more now that I have more time in the summer and all of that. You could like find a problem in your own life that you really want to solve. Like one time I was having a really hard time navigating the bus schedule on campus, and I really wanted to like design a new like bus tool for students to use on their phones. So just thinking about problems in your daily life and designing something for it on your own time can also be a really good way to have those projects on your portfolio, and things that I've thought about too. And yeah, I've definitely seen like my peers and my friends create really cool things from their own imagination, and it doesn't have to necessarily be like a competition or like an internship. You can definitely also put those on your portfolio too.
How do you structure the story for each case study in your portfolio, and how many details you include? Do you using different storytelling framework or different strategy to present yourself in each of the case study?
I guess to answer the first part of that question in terms of like how to structure the story of each case study, the kind of rule of thumb that I like to follow for case studies is to really incorporate a lot of storytelling in the process of like the entire case study. So to kind of break that down a little bit, I like to start by connecting the topic or the problem scope of your project to a human metaphor that's kind of relatable to the everyday person, because I think case studies are unique because since you're not necessarily only presenting it to someone that's really familiar about design. You might be presenting it to like a recruiter who's looking at your portfolio for the first time, or your family member who's like looking at your website, or even just like a random person that is curious about your work. And so I think the design user here, or like the design audience, is really different from other recruiting materials. And so that's why I think it's really important to connect these case studies back in a relatable way so that the everyday person can understand like what you're talking about and what your work is showing. So for example, one of my projects, the very first one that I did with Netflix, it was centered around company loyalty and member retention. And those are like very technical terms, right? Like if I was not in the tech industry, I would not know what like retention and like all these terms are. And so since it was like really kind of hard to understand, and that loyalty isn't like a common topic for everyone, I reframed this case study to focus on something like more humanly relatable, which was human relationships. And this was like an important step for me because it was still relevant to this design work in terms of like relationships are kind of analogous to member retention and member loyalty, but it was reframed in a way that allowed like anyone to really understand what it was about. We've all like had a relationship with someone, whether it's a friend or like your mom or your romantic partner. And so taking that experience and reflecting it in my work and allowing everyone to really understand what we're talking about here and why it's important, and walking through the design process there was really powerful, I think. And also allowing people to connect with my work and see its value. So yeah, like not having it be just familiar to people that are in the design world and in tech. And so that's kind of an example of like how I like to start by framing my case study, whether it's like, with gaming, like how can we take this unfamiliar topic and allow other people and like the common everyday person to connect with it and be interested in the work. That's like kind of one of my first tips, I guess. And then something else that I like to follow for like structuring the story is taking like the regular human-centered design process and making it your own, and kind of like showing your own process in every case study. Something that I've learned as a designer is that design is like really not a linear process. It's not just like you go from like research and then synthesis and then design. It's always going to follow some sort of like challenge or obstacle or like mistake. And so what I like to do is like include some sort of like surprise element in each case study, and like I highlight all the like difficulties I experienced, because there has never been a single project that I have done that has been perfect. Like there's always something that happens in the middle. There's always something that I've faced that I have to overcome. And so really reflecting on my project experience and identifying those moments is really important for me to structure that story. I think like I've always highlighted when we like make a mistake, or like when we like assumed something that was not successful, or like maybe we had like a team falling out. Like those things really help elevate the case study, I think, and like show how you as a designer are able to overcome those things, and also is able to like tell a good story as well, because it shows, you know, your setbacks and eventually how you're able to overcome them. Yeah, I think those are like my main two like ways that I like to structure the case study. And then in terms of like the second part of the question, what level of detail to include, um, I think for case studies, the important thing to know is that a lot of the times people don't spend very long on them. I think especially recruiters, they probably spend like 2 to 3 minutes maximum looking through your whole portfolio. And for case studies, they'll probably just like scroll through it or like skim through it or something. So, and it's really hard to kind of deal with this fact, because as a designer, you want to include everything, right? You want to include your whole process. You want to include all the details. But what I've had to swallow, like it's a kind of a tough pill to swallow, but what I've had to um, come to terms with is that you should really only highlight the most important parts of your journey as well. I've had case studies that you know, I've had case studies in the past that are super detailed, like so many blocks of text, so many like looks like an essay almost. And I would try to avoid that as much as possible. In terms of level of detail, it should be like super skimmable, easy to like digest, easy to like, you know, just pick apart the good words. I like to bold certain things that are like most important, and then like focus on the key takeaways rather than like the different research, all the different research insights or all the different steps. Really dissecting those and creating like the most concise version of the story, I think, is really important. I also like to just highlight the final solution in the beginning and the end, so that people can see, you know, the visual aspects, not have to rely on the words a lot. And so yeah, I like to like balance those two things. And to kind of put into perspective, what I did as a junior designer was look at other people's portfolios and see like how they structure their content, and could really compare like which ones seem the most digestible and which ones like I should follow in terms of the information density. And so yeah, those like different ways to follow for your own purposes are good ways to put that into perspective as well.
Since you have been working on some like school project, the student projects, like without like launching this kind of school project, how did you demonstrate the impact and the outcomes?
I think this was definitely a question I asked a lot of my upperclassmen when I was doing student projects as well, because, you know, in the industry, there's like all these big numbers and like percentages that you can use to showcase like your impact and like all these success metrics. But when you're working on a school project, you don't have that much data and like analyses of like everything that you did. And so I think when you measure impact in these projects, it can be a little bit difficult and a little ambiguous in terms of, you know, like what your work actually did in the grand scheme of things. I think the first thing I like to look at and reflect on is how did this work impact myself, you know? So the very first project, or the very first few projects that I did were like, you know, the first projects that I had in design as a whole. And so I started by reflecting like, how did these projects help me grow as a designer, and what new skills did it teach me? And I think including that in some sort of like reflection at the end of your case study is really important too, showing how like, you know, you are really aware of the things that you want to work on and the goals that you want to achieve in the future. That can be like a good start if you really don't have any like metrics or like impact to show, especially if it's like a passion project. I think for passion projects or like side projects, like things that aren't necessarily included with like a client, it's really important to highlight those like new goals that you personally worked on. Like, let's say I think for one of my projects, I learned how to use Adobe XD for the first time. Like, and I went through a whole process of learning this new prototyping tool. And so I included that as like one of the impact metrics. Like, this is like a new thing that I learned, and it was like a, you know, impactful for my journey. And then also talking about like the project itself. I think for passion projects, you could talk about how this problem affects people as a whole in your community or like people in the world. I think every design problem has a bigger audience, whether you might not know it or not. So for example, like the issue of bus schedules that I talked about earlier, like students be able to navigate campus is like a very important topic, and like everyone in the world really like experiences that if you're a student. And so like taking a look at like the data there and like looking at how that might impact people can be like a good way to include it in your case study as well. Even though you might not work directly with them, your solution will still, ultimately be helpful for those people if you do end up expanding it in that way. In terms of like student projects, again, going back to like my experience working in these clubs, um, aside from personal growth, I think it's helpful to kind of look at the people that you're working with and talk to your client, whether it's like a person in an industry or like the person you worked with this project, and understand like how it helped them and how your work helped shape their practices. It can be very ambiguous to like start, like I think for one of my projects, I just said that my work impacted the company by helping them shape their future concepts and like helping them create iterations for their future work in their team. I think this is a good way of like showcasing that, like you delivered something and your work will ultimately help their work in the future, because it's not like they're just gonna like throw it away or like they're not gonna like, not use it. I think something to note as a student is that your work is always like supplemental or like like a like stepping stone for people that you deliver it to. And so I've liked to highlight that in a lot of my work as well. um Other things, I think it's like helpful to talk about the people that you worked with as well, like being able to work with other designers or other students is also really impactful. And so I've talked about like how like our work was able to like help other students gain internships or like gain like jobs in their future career as well. And yeah, I think those are like some of the ways that I've been able to highlight that impact. I think it's definitely hard when you don't have like a direct client that you're working with, but always showcasing like your own personal growth as well as like societal impact and potential company impact is really important.
You mentioned about like showing this like personal growth, like personal learning, and also talk about the challenge and obstacle for your portfolio. Is there any other like key elements you think will help the online portfolio stand out? What is you like advice?
Other things that I've noticed when like crafting my portfolio and looking at other people's portfolio is really being able to have like a personal brand that stands out as well. I think being consistent in the way that you like create your personal story is really impactful. Whether it's like, we talked about like case study stories, like having those stories are obviously really important, but showing like your overall design persona is also super important as well. I think something that I've been able to focus a lot on is how people viewing my portfolio are able to understand my thought processes as a designer. Like what do my projects show? What does my homepage show about me? And like what do my goals show about me? I think the things that like waterfall from there include like what my goals are, like how my messaging stands out on my website, and like what my about page says about me. Those are like a lot of supplemental things that I think like help you as a designer um showcase and tell a company what you'll bring to the table. And like they really just glue together all the pieces of your personal story as well. So yeah, I think those are really great things to consider. I think going back to like that case study context, what I've like now that I've had a little bit more experience in the industry, what I've liked to do is kind of reflect on each of these projects and see like what I've learned and then what I can learn in the future as well. Like what are like the gaps in my experiences that I can further highlight in new projects, or like what are some experiences or processes that I've engaged in that are unique to myself and that I can highlight in portfolio presentations or other recruiting materials. And so I think being able to be aware of all of your knowledge as a designer is really important, and bringing that forward to new iterations of your portfolio is a great step in keeping it maintained and keeping it up to date with who you are as a designer. Yeah, I think that's like some of my advice. I think a lot of a portfolio is like showcasing who you are. Like I've tried to keep it very in tune with my brand and like myself and my personality. And like I like to keep it kind of casual as well, like not being super formal with how I tell my stories. I like to like include jokes here and there to like keep it lighthearted and keep the messaging captivating. And I think at the end of the day, that's how people get to know you and your design process.
So in addition to like the online portfolio, we also have a portfolio presentation decks for the interview purpose. So I wonder like how do you see the difference between building your portfolio presentation decks versus creating this online portfolio?
To sum it up, I think between portfolios and portfolio presentations, the main difference that I see is the fact that portfolios are typically a lot shorter in terms of like being consumable and skimmable. So to kind of like break that down a little bit, I think because portfolios have more of like a common everyday person audience, they tend to be a little bit less detailed and less exhaustive as the portfolio presentation is. And then looking at the portfolio presentation, typically like the main user or group or like the main viewer of these are going to be like designers or like recruiters or people that are like evaluating your design skills. So kind of looking at those two different audiences has helped me frame what I should include in a case study versus what I should include in a presentation. Like I mentioned before, case studies are typically like viewed in like less than a minute or less than 2 minutes. So they should be, easy to skim, easy to look at from a glance, and easy to tell what the final solution and impact was. Versus a portfolio presentation should tell more of that story, like fill in some of the gaps of what you might be missing in the case study, and then explain your entire process in more detail. I think going more in detail with the portfolio presentation, I like to talk a lot about storytelling, but I think in a portfolio presentation, storytelling is really like your number one tool that you should leverage for creating a successful presentation. Storytelling, I think, is super powerful because it allows someone to latch on to your thought process and just be really engaged throughout the entire presentation you're giving. I think including a lot of detail is important, but ultimately tying all those details back and identifying which ones are the most important for the story is going to be like your golden ticket. I think for a portfolio presentation, being able to showcase like your different skills as a designer and your different like thought processes is a lot more relevant in this case because it's your way of showing like how your brain works and how your problem solving skills work that might not be as easily readable from a case study. And I think like showing this through like effective oral presentation skills and effective visuals in a presentation is really is really engaging and will ultimately like be a lot more um impactful for your recruiter, whoever's listening to the presentation, to see what kind of designer you are. And so, yeah, I think in like my past experience crafting portfolio presentations, it's a lot easier for me to connect with my audience and with the people that I'm interviewing with when I tell a story, because it allows them to kind of, be curious about the problem space and like ask effective questions for me and kind of like follow along with my journey rather than just being like, oh, I did this and this and this. It's like, they're listening to these a lot of the time throughout the whole month, throughout the whole week. And so doing so allows you to be a more engaging storyteller and as a whole.
What is your like best practice for creating a resume?
I think in terms of crafting a good resume, how I kind of created my resume was first taking a look at other people's resume for inspiration. Obviously, like your resume should be unique, so not like copying it as a template, but like looking at other people's structure and the way that they laid out their information for inspiration. I think that was like my first step in seeing like how I can start from scratch and create something for my own resume. And then the next step that I typically follow is I actually like to write out all of my experiences on a Google Doc first instead of going into like Figma or like a different tool to create it. I think doing so allows you to like focus more on the content that you're writing in the resume rather than like just how it looks. I think a lot of the times as designers, we can get distracted by like, how things look and how things show on the screen rather than like the actual words itself and the content. And so I like to put all of my like experiences and bullet points in a separate Google Doc to see, how it reads and focus more on the words rather than the design of it. And then in this stage, I really like to try to perfect like how I explain each experience. And so this is a good way for me, first of all, to see how many experiences I have and like how I can order them and how I can display them, but also like how I can explain the story behind each one in a very concise way. I think this tends to be like the hardest part. I guess for me, like it takes a long time, surprisingly, to like just type out a few sentences about your internship and like talk or like your experience and talk very like concisely about the impact you had. But a like good structure I like to follow is by first in each bullet point talking about what you did and then what the specific impact was. I think like having both of those aspects in each bullet point allows you to like show the recruiter or whoever's looking at it, first of all, like what you accomplished, but also like why it was important in that experience. And so I like to kind of follow that rule of thumb in every bullet point that I create to make it, first of all, more consistent, but also add meaning to each of the things that I created, so that you're not just saying like, oh, I created like user flows and like screens and this, but like, so what, right? I think asking the question like, so what is really important when you are creating your resume because it allows people to see like what your impact was at a glance. And yeah, so after that stage, I like to like translate all of that information onto like Figma. I think for designers, like Figma is a typical tool you use to create design resumes, allows you to like create that 2-column format in the way that you want, or like, create a different layout that you want as well. And I like to translate that into a couple of different iterations before coming up with the final piece. And yeah, I think having like the 2-column format, whether it's like 1 column for experience, 1 column for like schools or like skills and stuff like that, is a great way to show like your all-roundedness as a designer. And yeah, I think overall that's like the process that I've followed.
Let's come into our final question. So what is your advice for a student designer or junior designer who are looking for their internship?
Yeah, for sure. I think if I had like one piece of advice that I would share with everyone, it would probably be to be as proactive as possible when you're looking for internships. And that's very broad, but I think to kind of like break it down a bit, I I think like just showing that you have a very genuine curious about design and about the internship is a really great attitude to have and mindset to have when you're going about it. I think obviously like looking for an internship is a very practical goal, right? But um, the like other part of that goal is being able to talk to people and like learn from their experiences and really be a sponge and taking all the advice to get to that internship. I think a lot of like in my experience, internships become like the internship recruiting process becomes such a like lengthy and like tiresome journey. And so like being able to humanize that a little bit more by like talking to people and like connecting with other designers that can help you, or like asking for feedback and being like very driven and proactive about that can really get you to like that golden place where you can start to get interviews and like start to like break into like more like real processes that will get you that internship. And so I think especially when you're first starting out, like I think like being humble and like being like very um just like, like staying true to yourself in terms of like why you're interested in doing an internship in the first place can really get you far in terms of getting to know the right people and getting your foot in the door with these opportunities. For example, like messaging people that you might know on LinkedIn, or like like looking at people's portfolio and then asking about a project that you really liked, or just connecting with old people that you've worked with. I think like talking with them and just like showing your genuine interest in the industry is like ultimately like of like a huge step in getting to like that process at the end. And then, like I think internships can be really stressful. And so just like understanding that you like everything will work out in the end is very important as well. Like don't stress yourself out too much about it. Like be like proactive about the things that you want to accomplish as a designer and like fill in those gaps where needed, like whether it's like creating another side project for your portfolio or like participating in more design-a-thons. All those things will help you create like a stronger brand for yourself, and then that's how you'll get those more opportunities coming your way. So yeah, I think there's like not really like a set step that everyone follows to like accomplish these experiences or get those experiences, but being genuine and just being yourself and showcasing your own like goals and your motivations will get you farther than you think. So.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy our conversations and subscribe my channel and see you next time.